I haven't seen.
Okay, if I could get everyone's attention, is this on? Is this on?
Yeah.
Is this on? Good. We got a good crowd here today. That's wonderful. So I would like to welcome all of you to the December meeting of the Sutter Buttes Flood Control Agency. And if we could do the roll call, Tara?
Matt Conant,
Present.
Todd Kimmelshoe,
Present.
Bo Shepherd,
Here.
Grace Espandola,
Here.
Charlie Hoppin, Al Matna's on Zoom, Lack Vergog,
Yes.
Mike Morris,
Here.
Rich Middle.
Here.
Thank you.
Well, let's do a salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Is there any public comment today about anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, none, seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. And is there any public comment on the consent agenda, Tara? Okay, no public comment there.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Did you get that, Tara? Okay, it was,
Matt and Mike.
okay.
That's an M&M.
Do you want to do a roll call vote or would you prefer a voice vote? Why don't we just do a roll call since we do have someone on Zoom, right?
Good, yeah.
Thanks.
Matt Conant,
Aye.
Todd Kimmelshoe,
Aye.
Bo Shepherd,
Aye.
Grace Espandola,
Aye.
Charlie Hoppin. Yes. I have a yes from him. Lack Vergog,
Yes.
Mike Morris,
Yes.
Rich Middle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will turn this over to Michael Bissett to discuss our updated strategic plan.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Good afternoon. Welcome to our last official meeting of 2021. So it's amazing, a whole year has gone by. So this is the update to our strategic plan. So last month I presented the draft. We had a pretty good discussion about it. I don't plan on getting into a lot of the details about it like I did last month. I did receive some verbal feedback, mostly just approvals and move forward, but we'll have a good board discussion here. A couple of things I wanted to cover. Really wanted to highlight the purpose of the plan. And the purpose of the plan is to help formulate and articulate a vision for flood management within the Sutter Butte Basin and to describe an approach to achieve that vision. The plan goes into a lot of detail on our goals and objectives and how we want to move the agency forward, how we want to build our risk reduction projects into the future. Next slide, please. Really, and this is my vision of what this document is. So this defines our goals and objectives. It puts it out there in writing. It's something to communicate with our stakeholders, the public at large, and our agency partners what our defined mission is. Very important to me, it guides staff's near-term and long-term focus to deliver upon the board's vision. So this is our blueprint on what our mission is, what the board is asking staff to provide to the community, defining what those goals are, how to achieve them, how to move forward in a very positive way. So it's an important document to our team on how to deliver our flood risk reduction projects. And then lastly, and very importantly, it sets up a framework for accountability. So now that we have this in writing, it's been communicated to me by several board members. This would be a great tool to utilize as we move forward on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, to like as a check-in, how we check in on how are we achieving our goals, how are we moving our mission forward. So we'll start documenting that in staff reports and in presentations to the board into the future. So with that said, I'd really like to turn it back over to the board chair, Mr. Chairman, and see if there's questions, comments from board members, and perhaps direction to staff to move forward.
Any comments from the board members, questions? No? Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Does this include discussions you've already had with us, or do you want us to go over those again?
I'd really like you to mention that, Bo, and then I could address it also.
Okay, so I had a couple of things I had input on. I don't have the document actually in front of me, but in the introduction it talked about the boundaries, and my thought was because some of our work is actually outside the boundaries, like Butte Creek, which the meeting we had was involved in that, and it does all lead to the bypass, but a lot of it turned into habitat, and so I would like that to be potentially considered in, so we don't limit ourselves to the, because I know in Butte County, there's a lot of those, like Cherokee and just a little smaller that are overgrown and need a lot of it. And if we're not there to step up to be able to help either do the work or help somebody do the work, I just think that we're missing an opportunity. And then with like sediment projects, not limiting ourselves to other opportunities, because back in the beginning, we never considered that sediment removal would be something we did. But I just think we should be open to other opportunities to improve our flood system.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Well, in the beginning, as you said, it wasn't in there because we didn't have the Orville Dam spillway. That's when we lost most of that habitat. Most of that sediment was deposited in the river. And I still think the state needs to step up and do more than they've done. And maybe we can push that horse, keep moving it forward. I don't know. It seems to be a long haul and a difficult haul.
Through the chair, I think the state thinks that they've done enough with that little money that they ponied up just to clean up where the boat ramps were. They figure, there's your hush money. That's good enough.
A couple zeros behind it.
Yeah, which was ridiculous for the pennies they gave us and the damage that they did.
Through the chair? It, to my knowledge, this also is a living document as well, right, Mike?
It is, yes.
So we can
add to it.
change the looks as grants and stuff are going through as well. So that's what I'm liking about this.
Okay, so Michael, is this something you want to take action on today? Do you want to make these suggested changes and bring it back at another meeting, or are we on a timetable to do it at this meeting?
Well, if I could address Bo's comments, I think when we spoke last night, Bo, I went back in and looked at the plan, and I think it's written in a broad enough way that the SBFCA, our board can direct staff to pursue additional projects that are beyond our boundary, just like we did with the Orville Wildlife Area. We actually talk about our regional planning efforts, and those efforts go way beyond our current borders. So we are looking at that, and we're looking at Cherokee Canal, and we can expand into the north. I know we've had some meetings with DWR on that. So if there's possible grant opportunities that we could pursue outside of our borders, I think our plan definitely gives us latitude to do that.
That's great, and I'm good with the plan. And as you and I talked, I know there are other documents besides this one that play into the larger picture of flood control and flood control management. So just my comments, and I'm good with it as it is a living document.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Michael, I have a question, I think more specifically to Scott. I don't disagree with anything that's been said here at all. I'm particularly happy that Bo brought it up. But you mentioned the Orville Wildlife kind of being a little bit beyond our scope. It was something that was completely paid for by other sources. And I guess my question to Scott is, if we go down some of these roads that expand our boundaries a little bit, which I completely agree with, are we still in line with the covenants of our organization, I guess you might say, as far as assessments and all? Because on one hand, the example that was given was something that was facilitated in a very professional way with entirely with outside dollars.
Yeah, Charlie, you raise a good point. So our boundaries are what our boundaries are, and they are actually established in the Joint Powers Agreement. To change them would require unanimous agreement of all the member agencies. The boundaries, however, do not limit where we can do work. They are where we have jurisdiction. And as you correctly point out, the Oroville Wildlife Area work was funded by the state of California. But the reason it made sense for us to do it was it lowered the water surface elevation in the river that then benefited our service area. And we're certainly exploring the Robinson's Riffle project area, which would be similar because it would have benefits. And we're also seeing if we can get state funding for that. We willingly, with the board's agreement, stepped into the river dredging, which is technically outside of our area, but it provides benefits by creating more channel capacity as well. And I think Michael's right. I think our strategic plan, as it's written, has the creativity and the openness for the board to say, please pursue X. And not only do we listen to you when you say, please pursue X, you've listened to staff when we've come back and said there's a Y opportunity. Do you want us to do it? And you've said yes. So I think the plan is set up to allow exactly what Bo is wanting, which is to make sure we can take advantage of opportunities that benefit our region. And I don't think that the language that's in there or our history is inconsistent with the boundaries.
Thank you very much. That pleases me.
So through the chair, just to make sure I fully understand that comment that the attorney wrote up. So, there's no law or anything that says that we can't step out of our boundaries to do a project that's funded by some other group or even ourselves.
Correct. And here's an example is it's not unusual for a city, for example, to have its water treatment facility outside the city boundaries, right? And that's a project a city is doing that's not within the city boundaries. Sometimes cities will then annex the land because they want to have more control over it, but that's an example. You can always do things outside your boundaries. You just don't have jurisdiction of extra superpowers as a result.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair. I really agree. I agree with the strategic plan, and I like the idea, Michael, as we discussed, bringing every month an agenda item to review and to keep us abreast of the progress as we are making progress with specific projects in the strategic plan. And also, I think it's beneficial for the community and our partners to also hear in advance or more timely than a yearly overview of how we are actually meeting some of those objectives that we're working through and how the funding is coming across. And this board helps decide on those priorities, as Scott was saying. You know, we can assist our team better by saying to them, these are our priorities for us. So Sutter Butte, you know, the Levee, Sutter bypass, excuse me, is an important priority for all of us. How are we getting to that? Working towards that. So I think that the strategic plan, as Mike Morris said next to me, it's a living document. Let's work with it, but also let's stay to those priorities that we can all agree on. And as we make progress, we can demonstrate some results and some action. Thank you.
And if the chair will indulge me for one more minute, Charlie talked about our boundaries as a concern, but also mentioned assessment dollar use in there. And Seth texted me to say, you know, have we as staff been clear enough with the board on what we can use assessments for? And so if you'll just bear with us one more minute, Seth can talk a little bit about the way we have approached the use of assessments so you have a clear picture on the boundary issue as well as the assessment issue, which Charlie, I didn't address when you raised it.
Yeah, I mean, so from a use of assessment perspective, I think that's separate and apart than the scope and geographic impact of the strategic plan. We're constrained with what we can use assessments for based upon what the property owners voted for. To the extent that we are interested in doing projects beyond the scope of the assessment, which was the Feather River West Levee and the southern boundary, the southern portion of the basin, then we would need to find our own source of revenue if it's a priority of the board to locally fund that. the other projects that we've done, we've gotten other funding sources, as you mentioned, Charlie, but I think, the scope of the strategic plan is separate and apart than the scope of what we can use assessments for. So we'd have to analyze those two things within their own constraints.
Any other board input on the strategic plan? So do you want an action on this today to approve the strategic plan, or is it just keep going on and on?
I would love an action on it, but,
Okay.
I'm open to the board's direction on it.
Okay, so if I would entertain a motion to approve the updated strategic plan.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Mike. Okay, it's Mike's second, Mike and Matt. Oh, sorry. Okay. Bo. Mike and Bo. You guys are too quick. Holy cow. Okay, so any discussion on that? Any discussion from the public on that? No? Okay. Do you want to call the roll? Thank you.
Matt Conant,
Aye.
Mike Ziegenmeyer, Bill Conley,
Aye.
Todd Kimmelshue,
All right.
Bo Shepherd, Grace Espandola,
Aye.
Charlie Hoppin, Al Motna. We'll give him a minute. Lackveer Gog. Yes. Mike Morris,
Yes.
Trish Smittle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Unanimous, excellent. So presentation of the monthly financial report. Seth, you want to handle that?
Just give Tara a second to load up the few slides that we have. We'll make this a quick Christmas gift here to get through it quickly. Okay. So this is for the report for month ending October 21, 11.5 million in working capital, about 18.5 million to date, and that's quite a big increase. We've received a bunch of payments from the state and also invoiced the state for additional work. In terms of operating revenue, about 800,000 for 2020, 2021. No assessments yet collected for operating revenue for 21-22. As you would know, the assessments aren't due until December, so for the first tax installment. For fiscal year 2021, ending June 30, 21, about 12.8 million in capital revenue, 18.5 million to date, and then for 22, another 2 million in receivables. So the difference of about 7.5 million on the next slide is made up of these payments listed here, but generally we've got about 7 million of accrued invoices that are pending receipt to date. So our collections for assessment revenues for delinquent assessments from 1920 prior years and 21-20 for fiscal year 2020, 2021, that's a mouthful, is about 6.9 million. And so that's what we would expect to receive again for fiscal year ending 22. In terms of the expenditures, you can see here, we've spent about 10 million total, or 10.5 million total between the 2 years, primarily again on the OWA projects, as I mentioned in the past, and the sediment removal as well. Those are the two big projects we've advanced, and everything else is really closeout and completion of other work or our operating expenses. Next bond assessment payments are due about in April, about 1.73 million. And we're all queued up, obviously, with revenue available to make those debt service payments already. In terms of our ongoing work, working diligently on the closeout of the UFR agreement, processing payments, and a lot of the receivables are reflective of retention releases that we've requested from the state. And then we're coordinating and working to close out our Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW grants for the OWA project. And so I think we've completed the closeout of the WCB grant. We're also working on the agency audit. What you'll see, I just want to give folks a really quick preview of that. This year, since the completion of a lot of our Feather River West Levee project work, we've transferred a lot of those assets over to the LMAs for maintenance. In the past, you've kind of seen our balance sheet grow in time with our capital expenditures on the project. As we transfer those projects away, our balance sheet will start to shrink because we'll basically be transferring those assets and retiring them off of our books for them to be those assets to be maintained by the LMAs or the state. So that's that'll be a highlight of our audit and our financial statements when we present them in February. The audit we're targeting the completion of the audit this month, and then it'll be presented at the next board meeting in February. The other work that we're supporting is the administration of the Feather River West Levee Financing Agency as they're advancing, Feather River West Levee Financing Authority as they're advancing the assessment and the regional levee impact fee, which Michael will speak a little bit about in his program project update. So that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
Questions of Seth? Okay, should we take action on this as well? Don't have the, okay.
Even five.
Information only, okay. Good.
Very much.
So we'll move on to Michael's report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we got the program project update. Since Seth went really fast, I'm going to slow things down and take up a lot of your time. No, I'm only kidding. So wanted to highlight where we're at on a lot of these projects we're working on, and you know, all of them tie into the strategic plan. So it's interesting. I'll look at how we present this into the future and in our staff reports as we provide that linkage to the strategic plan. So on Feather River West Levee Project 1, which is our project from Star Bend north to Thermalito Afterbay, we are still in process of environmental and cultural resource mitigation work. So we're working closely with the regulatory agencies on our Star Bend and Matthews mitigation sites. We have to put those sites into place conservation easements over them and put them into a management plan. And we're getting closer. It's been a little frustrating, but we're getting some recent coordination with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and we're hoping to be able to finalize this process into the first quarter of next year. And also on the cultural resources side, our consultants are wrapping up the reports, which is part of the mitigation for our project, and we'll be sending those out very shortly for final reviews through the Army Corps. On O&M manual coordination, this is also a coordination effort with the U.S. Army Corps and DWR and obviously our local maintaining agencies. We're finalizing the operations and maintenance manuals, which will be formally turning over to Levee District 1, Levee District 9, and the state maintenance areas through an action through the Central Valley Board. But we're working closely with the Corps to finalize that process, and that'll probably follow along the same timelines next quarter, perhaps into middle of next year, just because the time it takes the Army Corps to get through their processes. We, as the board knows, we've completed our 200-year certification. We did that in October. Now we're working with our member land use agencies so that they can make the proper findings so that they can continue to issue building permits. So we're setting up individual meetings with our member agencies, and we have one today with City of Yuba City later on this afternoon. On our project closeout mode, the long lead item has been the real estate transfer, so we're finalizing our acquisitions. We only have barely a couple left. They've been lingering on for a long time, but we're getting very close to the end. We'll be completing our record of surveys and formally transferring that property over to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board through the entity, the SSJDD, which is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District. That's the legal entity that holds property for the state for flood control. And then lastly, I mentioned this in previous meetings, the United States, the Corps of Engineers periodic inspections, we're awaiting the results of their inspections. We should get that early next year. And that'll highlight some work that we'll may need to accomplish into the future in order to maintain our 200-year certification. Once I get more clarity on that information, I'll be bringing that back to the board and coordinating closely with Department of Water Resources because the majority of those items are in the maintenance areas. On Feather River West Levee Project 2, which is our rural project, so south of Star Bend along the Feather River and including the Sutter Bypass, We have a public meeting set up for next Wednesday, the 15th at 6:30 p.m. at Berry Elementary. So we wanted to educate the public who live down in the southern Sutter County about our agency's efforts to accomplish our mission, which is to complete the levee improvements and provide a 100-year level of protection in the south. So we wanted to educate the public on what our activities are, what actions we're taking right now, and what things look like moving into the future. And also talking about our FEMA remapping process. So we'll be holding that meeting next week. We advertised it through the Appeal Democrat. We had a nice article a week or so ago about our program. We also sent out our public notification to every landowner in the Sabufka Basin. And then we're getting the word out on social media. So we'll see what kind of turnout we get, but we're looking forward to a good conversation next week. We're also looking at, advancing, how are we going to advance our work? And I've been communicating with the board on our coordination with DWR for Sutter Bypass critical repairs. We also have that lower Feather River 1.5 miles between the Highway 99 bridge and the confluence of the bypass that's yet to be improved. So our team, we're looking at options, and we want to present some options to the board at our next board meeting in February of next year. As Seth pointed out in his financial report, we have a pretty healthy budget moving forward. So we could utilize some capital into advancing some designs, permitting for projects, getting them shovel ready for future funding sources to complete the construction. So we're going to put some various strategies together and make that presentation to the board next month. And a lot of that is going to have to do with how successful we are in our meeting next week with DWR. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. So next slide, please. So on our DWR Small Communities Grant, so that's where we focused on the small community of Sutter and Tudor. And so we have a meeting next Tuesday with DWR. So we're advancing our communications with the state to try to have them fund us to do repairs along the Sutter Bypass. We're looking forward to that meeting. We'll be very prepared for it. We've had a lot of dialogue, since it's been over a year now, but when we had the Director Nemeth here in October, this board was very clear. We're actively pursuing funding. We're willing to cost share, and we're willing to take the lead on advancing the designs and the construction necessary to provide the protection to our community. So I'll let you know how those meetings go, and we'll build that information into our strategy moving forward and what we'll present in February. In the meantime, we're also keeping our eyes out for other funding opportunities. There's funding opportunities through the federal government, so through FEMA, through the U.S. Department of USDA. They have NRCS grants out there. We're attending a lot of these workshops to get more information to see, is our project suitable for these type of grant opportunities? And we think they are. We need support from the state because Sabufka does not own or maintain the Sutter Bypass. The state does. So we need their support to pursue some of these federal opportunities, and that'll be a discussion point next Tuesday. And at the same time, the state did grant us or amend our contract. We had $300,000 left, and we're utilizing that money to advance some geotechnical explorations and environmental and cultural explorations out on the bypass. And all that information will be factored into our improvement plans as we move forward. So we're making good use of that available money. And we have an application in with the Central Valley Board to advance some geotechnical borings out in the bypass. On the OWA Robinson's Riffle project, so we're closing out the Unit D project. That project's been done, but we're still closing out all our grants, and there's still some active monitoring taking place per our permit requirements. But at the same time, we're pursuing 2 additional grant opportunities, one through state parks and the other through DWR, and that's to build upon the good work that we did in the Unit D area and expand that up in the Orville Wildlife Area, which we talked about earlier through the strategic plan. There's a direct benefit to this agency, to our basin from flood risk reduction, but also other opportunities for providing some good quality work out in that area. On our regional planning efforts, we're pursuing, the Sutter bypass is in there, so we have a little bit of money that we can pursue or advance our grant work there. Cherokee Canal, we're working closely with the state they received $20 million to do improvements on Cherokee Canal, and we want to help them move that money forward in the most positive way. So we're working through our regional planning efforts on that area. And we're working really closely also with Yuba Water Agency on their New Bullets Bar secondary spillway and on their operations manual update that they're coordinating through the Army Corps. So I'll be attending a meeting next week that the Army Corps is putting on. It's the manual updates for New Bullets Bar and Orville Dam. And since we're a downstream recipient of waters through those facilities, they wanted us to attend that meeting. And so I'm able to charge my time to this regional planning grant. And this is a regional benefit. So it's a very positive project, and we're hoping to stay really close in touch with that. I also participated in the state's Orville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission meeting, which Chairman Kimmelshoe and Connolly attend, and also Conant. No, it was a good meeting, and Todd represented us very well at that meeting, as well as Matt. So we have, the Director Nemeth attends that meeting, Senator Nielsen, Assemblyman Gallagher, Secretary Crowfoot. So we have the right people in those meetings to talk about Orville Dam and then also talk about SBFCA interests. So I think we made very valuable use of that meeting to advance our efforts. Also, one of the other projects I'm working on is still with the Army Corps, the 5-mile Sutter Basin project. The construction is completed, but we're still in project closeout mode. Punch list work is still ongoing. And we're also assisting on a LD1 fence and gate replacement. Their fencing and gates were impacted by the project, and they need to be restored. So we're taking that on, and we'll be taking hopefully a contract to this board for approval in February. Lastly, I'll just cut to the chase on the bottom bullet, the regional development impact fee. We're still working on finalizing our AB 1600 work. We're setting up meetings with our member land use agencies to move that development impact fee process forward. That will provide some valuable resources to advance our strategic plan work. And we're setting up those meetings now. I'm hoping to have the majority of them completed in the first couple of months of next year so that we could help the agencies move that forward through the processes that they need to go through. Next slide, please.
Hey, Mike, before you give us the ho-ho, can you go back? Can you go back just a sec? Oh, sorry, through the chair. May I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
The last slide. 20, that federal crediting, that 27 million?
Yes.
When are we cashing in on that?
Oh, that's, I sort of skipped over that. I was talking a lot. I wanted to move forward.
I saw that, my friend.
So Seth's team and I are working very closely with the Army Corps and the state, identifying what our credit is for the federal project. So we're looking at, it's right around $27 million. So it's a very big chunk of money. So we're working closely with SBFCA. They could be a recipient of purchasing that credit from this agency. So we set up an initial meeting. I think it was last week. We're going to continue advancing those discussions. I will be bringing information to this board. The board will have to approve whatever we decide on how to move forward with that money and what type of deal we structure with SBFCA or perhaps another agency that could be a potential suitor for that credit. So we're in that process right now. And Scott, did you want to say something? Yes.
So just a few things on this. One, in the interest of disclosure, LWA and Downey Brand are both advisors to SBFCA as the potential purchaser. We previously have had that relationship. And so we've disclosed that to executive director of both agencies, and they've agreed we can keep working on it under the condition that we're not leading the discussion. We're scriveners. Like, they're deciding what they want, and then we're writing it and making it happen. So I want the board to be aware of that. Secondly, this is a valuable credit. The question is how to capitalize on it. And if I can just go a little bit more in depth than what you did since you raised the issue, the credit is there, but to transfer it to another project requires the Army Corps to agree to do so. It also requires that the same non-federal sponsor be the non-federal sponsor on both projects. Now, SBFCA is not a non-federal sponsor on any other federal project, but our co-non-federal sponsor, the state of California, is on both. So we're riding their coattails. They're doing the plan to move it, and and when I say we now, I'm talking about SBFCA, we are working to have our money float with the state's money to that project, and then SBFCA would buy that piece of the credit from SBFCA. And so the work that LWA is doing is really good in quantifying what it is, and then we're really reliant on the state to make this happen. Now, they're incentivized to do it because they have, what is it, $50–60 million in credit? Something like that? Yeah, there's 90 million between us and the state. So they're incentivized to move that money down there. But we have to rely on them because we don't legally have the authority to move it because we're not on that project. And so we can only go so far. And what Michael Bissett talked about bringing back to the board would be the terms of how the money would move. What are they going to pay for it, right? Are they incentivized to pay $1 for $1 credit? Probably not much interest in doing so. Are you incentivized to sell it for a penny for $1 credit? Not much incentive to do so. And so the two boards working through the executive directors will have to find that place in between where everyone's happy.
Thank you. I appreciate
Charlie?
it.
You have to get to a microphone for the public.
I'd also add that the timing of when that money flows will be key to the provisions of that agreement between the two agencies on the transfer. So when they would actually make payments and stuff. I think that was part of your question, is when will we see that? It'll be a function of a negotiation between the two executive directors of when, SBFCA can utilize that credit and when it makes sense to when the transfer and the Army Corps approves the credit transfer, will flow into that as well. So that process that SBFCA is working through will feed into that negotiation.
Yeah, so another way to say that is, what is SBFCA's risk that it buys something it can't use? And in theory, it should pay less for something with a high risk and pay more for something with a low risk. And how do you time that in with the state and the Corps approving it? And those are all issues that you, as the board, through the executive director, are going to have to wrestle with.
Right. So it sounds to me like at least the discussion is being moved because we began this discussion over a year ago. So it's having some sort of, some traction. Thanks, Mike Morris.
Yeah.
And so it would be good to just, you've been good, Michael, about bringing this forward every, time and then putting it on the agenda. Just curious to know where that 27 million and the aspect of funding, and could we potentially have this somehow wrapped up, not necessarily finalized, but something moving in the next 6 months or so?
I think we'll have more clarity on our ability to have that credit moved over to SBFCA because the like Scott said, DWR and the Corps are working through that aspect of it right now. And then we're working directly with SBFCA on what would the potential terms be on the sale. I think one item, Seth, you didn't hit upon is SBFCA's ability to pay. And I think that may be somewhere down the road. They're not they don't have that money to buy it right now. I think they're looking at ways to build up the way that they fund their agency. So that's also going to be a factor, timing-wise.
Yeah, and so the updates you've received previous were on perfecting the credit. Now we're starting an additional conversation on how would we transfer the credit once it's perfected. And I think the team can continue to provide real-time updates on perfecting the credit because that's what LWA is actively working to do. In terms of transferring the credit, now it's, okay, what's the latest in DWR's development of the comprehensive plan? What's the latest in the Army Corps' consideration of and approval of the comprehensive plan? What's the discussion between SBFCA and SBFCA about when the credit would be needed and what the terms are for payment? And do you pay for a credit you might not get, or do you pay for it the day you use it, or do you pay for it at a discount in an earlier period of time? And that's all the stuff that's now being developed. I think you said 6 months, and I think there are some things that will definitely happen in 6 months. But if I had to predict when an actual credit transfer would occur, I think we're looking at probably over a year till the Corps would even approve the comprehensive plan. And knowing the Corps, it could be longer than that.
I think the way that you just described it here, the last part really made sense to me of the actual process of how this credit is being theory. Now we're getting to the actual, let's get the money, figure out how that's going to end up looking as a transfer or some sort of income or revenue, I should say, into our funding, our own funding. But thank you for the update. I really appreciate that.
Charlie?
Michael, I have a couple comments to make before we go on to the next slide. When you meet with DWR next week, to me, it's almost bizarre that we have done all the cores that we've done between Butte County and where we are today, and we've got 1.5 miles of the same system that doesn't have a core in it, and they don't seem to be in any big hurry to do that. And I just think it's just bureaucratic bizarro. Would it make sense to try and tie what we want to do on emergency repairs on a state levy with us facilitating and participating and completing this last 1.5 miles of a system that's basically a weak link in the whole chain? Can we tie those together and say, we'd be happy to help you folks complete something here, but we need some help on your levy as well?
Yeah, I think, Charlie, I think that's a really good point. I think can you go to the previous slide? And then the last bullet there, where internally we're working on strategies. So Chris and Seth and I, we're looking at what are the costs to complete that last 1.5 miles of levee along the Feather River. And then what are the costs for completing those critical repairs along the Sutter bypass? So we're looking at design and permitting costs and then also construction. And then we're looking at what budget do we have available, SBFCA, to be able to advance both of those at the same time, and how much money are we going to get from the state on the bypass? The state right now has no interest in completing that last 1.5 miles along the Feather River, as far as all the discussions we've had with them. Now, we're going to continue to pursue that, but I think they're more inclined to helping us complete the critical repairs along the Sutter bypass versus that lower 1.5 miles along the Feather. But what I'm saying is perhaps we advance those projects at the same time, utilizing agency funds and also state funding, depending on how much we can get from them, as we perfect these communications. Yeah, so that's what we're looking at. And I want to present those options to the board in February.
The other thing is you might remind them, I'm all for cleaning Cherokee Canal. I mean, I've seen it and it's a mess up there, and it certainly doesn't flow at design capacity because of all the vegetation there. When that's cleaned out, it's going to enhance the flow, but the flow is going to go through the Sutter bypass. So, to me, they almost kind of go hand in hand. You don't push water through a dirty ditch, but we clean out the funnel on the top end and we concentrate it on the bottom end where they don't want to do anything to it. So.
Well, we're advancing all of those areas, Charlie, as you know. So
believe me, I'm not opposed to Cherokee Canal. There's been a lot of work done there, and it'll be nice to see it clean. But.
Go ahead, Matt. Through the chair. So, Michael, also, when you brought that up about repairing the bottom mile and a half, what about the Army Corps? Do you think they would have some funding for that as well?
No, the federal project stopped at Laurel Avenue. So when they looked at we had a feasibility study done. It defined the bottom limits of their interested project at Laurel Avenue and north. So, and it was all based on, where you do your breaks along the levee, what it floods, and what the impacts are. It's all a benefit cost ratio type analysis that the Corps went through. So that's as far south as we could get federal interest was at Laurel Avenue.
Yeah, and then,
Having a tire and leaving a 1-inch gap.
yeah, exactly. Well, and then the other thing is I wanted to bring up is you had mentioned Yuba County Water Agency doing the repair on their reservoir. Don't forget that Campfire West is at the same time South Sutter is doing a spillway enlargement too, and there might be some positive impacts to that. You might want to reach out to them, and that's FERC also. FERC driven.
Thank you for that. I will. One item before we jump to my last slide, and I forgot to put it in for the program project update, but I was going to have Scott provide a real quick update on FEMA Risk Rating 2.0. We've attended some meetings recently. Scott actually had a FEMA representative at the Central Valley Flood Control Association meeting provide an update. So Scott was going to do a quick 5-minute summary to just educate the board on what that is and how it could potentially impact our constituents. Scott?
Thanks, Michael. So this is a fairly complicated topic, and I will only be able to hit the highlights in 5 minutes. If any of you want more detail, let me know and we can chat separately, or if you think it's worthy of a bigger briefing, we can ask Chris Fritz, who's following this as well, to do some sort of a presentation at the next board meeting in February, which seems like it's filling up already as being a pretty big meeting. Okay, so to back up a bit, the National Flood Insurance Program is set up where the government says we'll offer what used to be subsidized flood insurance in exchange for communities' agreement to set minimum standards. And the minimum standards are that development doesn't happen in an area that has at least a 100-year level of protection. And that's why we always talk about the idea of getting to a 100-year level of protection accreditation, because that's where people can build and mandatory flood insurance is not required. FEMA's approach over the decades has always been what's called the light switch approach. It's a binary approach. Either it has a 100-year level of protection or it doesn't have a 100-year level of protection. And everything under 100 is rated exactly the same for insurance cost, and everything over 100 is rated exactly the same for insurance cost. So if you have a 300-year level of protection, you're paying the same insurance rate nationally as someone who has a 100-year. And if you have 99-year, you're paying the same rate as someone who has 1-year level of protection, okay? And FEMA has known this isn't the way insurance companies actually do things, When Michael and I go for a life insurance policy, they might notice that I'm a few pounds heavier than Michael and I might not get the same rating that Michael does. And, my wife who runs 20 miles a week gets an even better rating because there are differences between us. And so FEMA decided to roll this out in something called Risk Rating 2.0. And the concept is that the mandatory flood insurance requirement is still binary. It's still based on, are you a 100-year level of protection or not? But when we actually sell you the insurance product, we're going to analyze your actual risk, and we're going to base your risk based on it. Now, that's complicated by the fact that Congress has previously said you can't increase someone's rate who has an existing insurance policy by more than 18% a year. And it's also complicated by the fact that the National Flood Insurance Program currently doesn't raise enough money even to cover its existing costs, let alone Risk Rating 2.0. So the example the FEMA agent gave was, if you're currently paying $1,000, you probably should be paying $1,500. And you're going to see an 18% increase a year to get from $1,000 to $1,500 for the next, do the math, Seth, probably 3 years until you get there. Separately, they're implementing Risk Rating 2.0, where now they're going to look and say, in addition to or separate from the standard rate that everyone's paying, we want to recognize what your actual risk is. So we had this meeting through the Flood Control Association last week or the week before. And we gave them some basins, and we said, tell us how you're rating these basins so we can understand how you're setting your rates. And so one basin we gave them was the RD 784 basin right across the river, Plumas Lake. And the other basin we gave them was RD 999 Clarksburg. So if you're familiar with it, it's a long stretch of levee on the Sacramento River on the west side of the Sacramento River from just downstream of West Sac down to Isleton, I guess it is. And so we said, tell us how you're considering these two. And we made a mistake in not being clear enough, which benefited us because some of you who know on the other side of the river, RD 784 is Plumas Lake, and it's also this little levee called the Horseshoe Levee, which is on the other side of Plumas Lake above Dry Creek, and it protects this little agricultural ground on three sides, hence the name Horseshoe Levee. So they shared with us, oh, we took a look at how we're doing ratings based on these three different basins. And here's FEMA's assessment of these basins based on something called the National Levee Database, which is populated from Army Corps of Engineers data. They said the highest rated, the best protected of these basins is the Horseshoe Levee, which we're considering to be a 500-year levee. Now, you've got people in the audience laughing because it's ludicrous. It's an agricultural levee that's open on one side, that hasn't had a single improvement to it since the Corps took it over, that's barely maintained, that floods regularly by water going around it. But in terms of the way it looks on paper or on the web, it looked like a 500-year levee to them. The next best rated was Clarksburg, which they rated as a 200-year levee. Now, Clarksburg is not accredited because it doesn't meet FEMA requirements because it's rather old, it has a lot of encroachments, a lot of vegetation on it. It doesn't meet the geotechnical requirements. In fairness to the Corps, it has stood for well over 100 years and never breached. So it maybe doesn't meet it on paper, but it's a pretty good levee. It's never breached. I don't think it's a 200-year levee, but it's, you know, it's solid. And the third quality levee was Plumas Lake, which they rated as a 50-year levee, despite the fact that we've now invested $500 million on that levee, and it's pretty damn good. So why did it get rated as a 50-year levee? Because FEMA has this program called Provisionally Accredited Levees, and this is something that was allowed when FEMA did map modernization and said, tell us that your levees meet our criteria. And communities could either say, yes, here's proof, or they could say no, and then they weren't accredited, or they could say, they will meet it, we just need to gather the data to give to you. And these levees were that middle ground, provisionally accredited. Well, FEMA just uniformly said, well, if they're provisionally accredited, they're not 100, but they're not 0, let's just go with 50. And they ignored the fact that we're in process of having that full basin to be FEMA accredited. Rick Reinhardt at MBK has already signed all the paperwork. FEMA's just still reviewing it. FEMA didn't really do anything wrong. They're just working with pretty incomplete data. And their first response was, if this is wrong, tell us. We want to fix it. And we're in communication now with them about all of those things. So I'm sharing this detail so you can kind of understand how screwy it is. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. But you also have to think about how it's going to apply here. So to the extent that someone is buying a new house and buying a policy now, they are going to get hit with this full risk rating 2.0 rate. To the extent that someone already has a policy and it's being renewed next year, in April is when FEMA will be applying the new risk rating 2.0 number, subject to the 18% increase that's allowed by statute. So if Grace has a home and she has flood insurance right now and she's paying $700, you'll get an invoice next year that'll say, risk rating 2.0 full rate, I'll make up the number, $2,000. Last year's $700, statutory increase allowed 18%, now you're going to be paying $900 or whatever that number is. And so they're trying to inform people of what the risk is. Because we have a unique levee system, and this is Chris Fritz's issue, where from all the work we've done north, we're accredited. Where we stop doing work, it's unaccredited. FEMA treats it all as a single levee system. We have no idea how FEMA is going to treat it when the paperwork comes out. FEMA did tell us in the next few weeks they're going to release a database of every levee in the nation and how they are rating it. So we will have optics into it. And if the number is not the right number, we will have time to go to FEMA and say, get this fixed before the rates come out.
But as representatives of your local communities who hear from people who express concerns about big bills that show up in the mail, this is a little bit of a background on what we're dealing with and what we're pushing to make sure that we're not overpaying for insurance in our basin. Now you can understand why I thought 5 minutes might just pique your interest, but it's a pretty deep topic.
I dare say, is there any questions of Scott? on that topic?
I'll ask offline.
But I will
Offline.
say that people that live in the East Biggs, many of you have probably heard of East Biggs, but there's an East Biggs also, who is right next to the Feather River. They've been bugging me for the last year. When's the FEMA going to get in here and redo this? And when's my rate going to be dropping? So you're telling me it may be a while.
Well, and the answer you might end up having to give them is, well, it's going to take a while for them to redo it, and in the interim, your rate's going to go up.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that.
That was really what I was thinking, because I had the same calls, and a few months ago, I said, hey,
Maybe during redistricting, Mr. Connolly could take over that East Biggs area.
No thanks.
No, I'll trade you downtown Orville.
Well, I will say we've raised this issue with the state of California, and we've said we need your help in pushing these agencies. So we have requested a meeting with the Corps to better understand the data they're putting into the levee database. And once we see that list, we will use the state of California to also lean on FEMA to say, you've got to move quicker. You can't do the first complaint. A homeowner writes in and says, I think you have my first floor elevation wrong. Should be a different level of concern by FEMA than you have a 27-mile levee segment wrong. So the state is with us on trying to push this.
Well, it's unfortunate. We probably got the best levee in the state of California, if not the nation, and we should be at the lower end, obviously. So, all right. Well, any other questions? Last slide.
Last slide, please.
Through the
Merry
chair.
Christmas, everyone.
Through the chair, I got to.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Connolly, I apologize. Go ahead. My colleague from.
I didn't realize your last was actually wishing you Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays or whatever we're supposed to do now. Hey, I just want to bring to everybody's attention, I am on the Citizens Advisory Committee and the commission or whatever up there at the lake. But I'm also part of a group of private individuals, Feather River Recovery Alliance, after the spillway, have self-funded, mostly business people. I've talked to Matt briefly about this before, about real concerns on the dam safety and how it needs to change. But I'm not going to get off all into that. I'm going to state something very specific. Right now, the only inundation map that we really have is a sunny day scenario where the dam fully fails. And that led to having people leave their homes and actually putting them at risk instead of having a scientific mapped scenario when the spillway happened. So we have, with our own money, meaning this group, hired Dr. Rune Storensen from UC Berkeley, and he's very well known, he's very scientific, and what he desires to do, and he is willing to get through his charity, he's going to do this through a charity because he doesn't need the money really, is do a mapping with different scenarios of release from the dam. And these don't even have to include a failure, because you can have releases from 150 to 650 cubic feet per second under the existing infrastructure, meaning if the regular spillway is at full capacity and it still goes over. Do we know that would ever happen? No, but I think that we deserve to have the scientific knowledge to know and project not only on a sunny day a full failure, but a heavy discharge, because, as we know, they do make mistakes, right? I mean, in Orville, we've been evacuated every 10 years. And so what we're looking for is letters of support from, it doesn't have to be SBFCA, but the individual entities and the counties to ask the commission, Citizens Advisory Commission, to take this serious and allow us to proceed forward. And we're not even asking for money, if you get what I'm saying. There's grants available.
And I think every downstream community has an interest in that. And some other time we can talk about real dam safety and that whole thing, but I'm just looking for letters of support because the next meeting, I've been told by Nielsen's staff that we will get agendized. The first time we agendized them, if you're at the meeting, they put somebody that told us about the great history of our dams and how great we are. And then the last guy after him was how, we're the safest dams in the world, and we only got one and what was it, 1 in 500 chance of ever having a failure. And I'm thinking, man, they almost drown me every 10 years. They burn down a powerhouse, break the spillway, they've overflowed the emergency spillway, and I should never use it and all that. So I do have a little tainted view of all that. But again, I'm getting back to the point. If you can see it, I can get you more information, but we just need a letter of support to take them serious and let Mr. Storenson, if you pronounce his name right, to do these inundation studies from 150,000 to 650,000, not only during dry times, but during wet times, and there's probably a more likely scenario. That's my ask. And it's not on the agenda, so the board can't take action. The lawyer will tell you that.
Could we agendize that next time, Michael?
We can. Is that too late though, Bill?
I think I don't even remember the next meeting is. I think it's every 3 months.
I think it's in March, the next meeting.
That's March.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Let's do it.
Agendize it, that's fine. But if you use individuals, we'll take it back to your cities and your counties or your levee districts. And I think it's a realistic ask because truly in my community, probably 40, 50,000 people were put at risk that didn't need to be. Because when I got a hold of a friend in San Jose, for example, my house, clear back when the dam was built and a full inundation, the school, right, I can see, was an evacuation zone, meaning it would never get there, even if the whole dam collapsed. But my whole neighborhood's gone. I leaned a ladder up to the roof and talked my wife into staying, but yeah. So I wasn't the one stuck down by the road, right? And so I think every county below us should have interest in this study too, for the same reason. You don't want to over-evacuate, and you want to have a scientific method to it.
Right. Hey, Bill, can you
Through the chair.
maybe send everybody on the board the email and the contact information?
I can do that.
I see no reason why Sutter County couldn't write a letter. We probably need to get this to Yuba County as well. And
through the chair, we would have a really big interest in that, Supervisor Conley. I want to make sure I get the right last name there, but
I've been called a lot.
yeah, I've heard a few names, but
Been watching Facebook.
yeah, just a little. I try to keep track of all my community. But I think in the city of Yuba City, we experienced that. That was a main issue when I was campaigning of that whole evacuation and the poor, I'll just say it this way, the poor planning of the emergency preparation. But if you can email that information to Mike Ole and then distribute it to the rest of us, and then I can send it out for our city, okay?
I'll do that.
Thank you.
I really
that's right. You
appreciate
probably
it.
can't email all of us separately, right?
Yeah, Bill, why don't you email it to Tara? And then she can send it out to board members, alternates, and even the member agencies if you'd like.
The Brown Act.
I don't think so. We're not taking action.
No, but it's communication, and let's not create a possibility of someone complaining about it in the newspaper, right? We'll do it by the book.
I'm
sick of the Brown. Oh, I didn't hear that. Nobody said that. So, okay. Did you want to explain your last slide, Michael, or anything? Or?
Oh, it's just my wishes to everybody. Have a great Christmas, happy holidays, be safe, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody back next year.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and Merry Christmas.